observations. So let's define an observation. In the tree editor, click on Observations. And this brings up a button for New Observation folder. You also see the same option along the top. Both buttons do exactly the same thing. So if you click on New Observation folder, it creates an observation folder, which is just a way for you to organize your observations. You can have all of your observations in one folder or multiple folders for your observations. It's really up to you. You can also label your folders, which can be helpful if you plan to use multiple observation folders. But as you see, there's no red X, so they're not required. For this example, I'm going to call it M51 because that's the target I plan to use for the observations within this folder. We also have a text field that you can enter any comments about the folder, but again, it's not required. Over in the tree editor, you see observation 1, and APT automatically creates that observation when you created the folder. Now the number is 1, and APT will create observations sequentially. However, you do have the ability to change this to a number between 1 and 999, but you cannot use the same number over again. So if you have a different numbering scheme, you're more than welcome to use it. I plan to just go in order and use 1. I can also label my observation. Again, it's not required, but some observers find it helpful. I'm going to call it nearest because that's the instrument I plan to use for this observation. And now it's just a matter of getting rid of these red X's. So under instrument, I can select nearest, my template. I can use imaging, I think, for this one. And my target, I'm going to go with M51. And this brings up the nearest imaging. I need to add a filter, and I just have to select add. And it allows me to then enter a filter. And it's these pinkish cells that you need to fill out. If I click here on filter, it'll show me all of the available filters. I'm going to use F090W. And then I have to enter groups. I'm going to enter 2 and integrations of 1. So now I've entered a filter. It's likely that maybe I want additional filters, and I can just hit the add button again and do the same thing again. Maybe this time picking a different filter and different number of groups and integrations. I can also duplicate a row. So this row that's in dark blue, if I hit duplicate, it will duplicate it, and then I can just go in and change to a different filter, so I don't have to enter everything again from scratch. And like an Excel spreadsheet, it has an insert above, which inserts a row above whatever row was highlighted. And so now I can go in and enter different filter and group and integrations. The filters will execute in the order that they appear in APT, so you can move them around using the filter arrow keys here. I'm going to take this number 3 and move it down to 4. And there it is on the bottom row. But I could also move it back up if I wanted, maybe to 2. And then easily I can remove a filter in a row if I just hit the remove button. Now there are a few other tabs that you see. A mosaics property. I'm going to show you a mosaic a little later, so we'll come back to that. Special requirements. I will be showing you all kinds of special requirements a little later, so we'll come back to that as well. And then there's a comments field, and this again, like the observations folder, allows you to enter a comment into just a text field if you want to. It's not required. Now there are a few other things that I think can be helpful to point out. At the top you see a little box here next to duplication. If you plan to duplicate an observation from a previous cycle, you need to check this box and explain in your PDF why you're duplicating a previously observed observation. It could be maybe it's time variable, and that's just a legitimate reason for it, but you do need to put that into your PDF and check this box. Now this doesn't happen to be a duplication, so I'm going to uncheck it. Now, you may notice duration here. We see for science, it's showing it's a little over 2,400 seconds, but the total charge time is over 7,400 seconds. To understand that a little bit better, I'm going to go over to the tree editor and expand it out. And we have visit 1-1. And it starts showing me my different durations, the science time, the instrument overheads, slew, observatory overheads. It's a lot of different overheads. Now, this 2,100 second slew overhead is charged to all observers on the first observation. And that's because it's not possible to know the distance slewed from the previous target to this target prior to scheduling. So all observers are charged a slew time of 2,100 seconds. And the little triangle here in yellow is just giving us a warning that these overheads are provisional until the visit planner has been run. And that will be run a little later when Trisha takes over. Now, before I move on, you may be wondering what a visit is. And a visit is a set of exposures on a single guide star without scheduling interruptions. So they're an actual scheduling unit. We schedule visits, and many observations only have one visit. But there are observations that have multiple visits, and you'll see an example of that a little later. So back to our nearest observation here. I think before I do anything else, I'm going to save it. It's a good idea to save your program frequently. You never know when your computer will freeze up on you or something else will happen. So under the File menu, we can hit Save As, and this allows me to call it whatever I want and save the program. Okay, now I've done that, and I think I want to create some more observations. Well, there's a lot of different ways you can do that, including a few shortcuts that you may find helpful. So under Edit, we have Cut, Copy, Paste, and a duplicate. And if I click on Duplicate, it creates the exact same observation. And this can be helpful if you plan to have a pretty much similar setup and you don't want to go through and enter everything from scratch. So maybe I'm just changing to a different target. I don't have to go through and do it all by hand. I can also do it for multiple duplicate, and I can do it up to a number of copies. I wouldn't put in 1,000 because you'll probably be sitting there forever, but in this case, I'm just going to do 5. And it'll create 5 new identical copies, and that'll be an easy way for me to make quick changes without having to go through and enter them again. Now, there's one other feature that can be very useful. I can do a difference between 2 observations. So if I highlight observation 1 and observation 2 and go back under to the Edit menu, I see a difference button. And if I select that, it will indicate with this bluish triangle all the difference between the 2 observations. So it shows me obviously the number is different and the target is different. And this feature can be really useful when you might be working around and playing with different observations and you have a lot of them and you aren't quite sure what the difference is. You can use this option. It also allows you to do it on 2 proposals. So if you have 2 proposals loaded that you've maybe saved and you want to compare the differences between them, you can do the same button for 2 proposals and it'll show you all of the differences between those 2 proposals. And to get rid of this, there is just a little gray X here on the side. And if I click on it, it's gone. Now, I've talked about having multiple copies of programs. And, as you're going along, it's pretty common to decide, hey, I don't really like what I've been doing. I want to get rid of all these changes. If you want to go back to the previously saved version, you can come under the File menu and click on Revert. This will pop up a warning making sure you understand that you will lose all of the changes you've done since you've last saved. But if you're okay with that, you can click OK, and it'll bring up that last saved APT file. And that can be really useful way to get rid of everything instead of trying to delete them all by hand. Okay, so I'm back to my one observation, and perhaps I want to create another observation folder. If I go under New, I have the ability to create another folder. In this case, I'm going to call it Exoplanet because I plan to use that exoplanet target. And now I'm going to come back to observation 2 and call it Miri. Select my instrument. And again, if you really want some help, remember there is that context sensitive help. So if I want to learn more about Miri targets, I can click on that and templates, and it'll show me different information in JDocs. So in this case, I'm going to go with Miri imaging and select my target, which is my second target. Now you may have seen that coordinated parallel appeared. If I would check this box, it shows me which instruments can be done in parallel with Miri imaging. So I have the option to do NearCam imaging or nearest WFSS. It is not required that you have coordinated parallels, but if you have a scientific reason for it, this is how you would enter a coordinated parallel. And APT will only show you the coordinated parallels that are allowed. If APT doesn't show it to you, then it's not a configuration that's allowed. I'm going to uncheck this box because I don't plan to make this a coordinated parallel. And now I have to fill out the Miri imaging template. It's a little bit different from the nearest one. I think I'm going to do a subarray of full. Now I have to enter a dither, maybe a 2-point dither for this one, and then down to my filters. F560, 5, and I plan to use my first dither. And now I've created another observation. You can look at the spreadsheet editor. Now, if I click on spreadsheet editor, it has a lot of options under the show menu. Right now it's showing me my different observations, but I can, look at visits, for example, and it'll show me information, all those overheads for the visit. I can look at the different templates, the exposures. Maybe I want to quickly just change this without having to go through and manually do it through the tree editor. And this can be helpful if you have a large program and you just want to make a few changes, you don't want to click everything. You can play around with the spreadsheet editor. Now, I talked about those mosaic properties a little bit and mentioned I'd bring that up again. So here we are back in our mosaic properties, and maybe I want to do a 2x2 mosaic. So I can do 2 rows and 2 columns. Now down under mosaic tiles, you notice I now have 4 tiles and 4 visits. And indeed, if I go over to the tree editor, I now have 4 visits for this observation. And it's very common for mosaics to have multiple visits in one observation. And it's nothing to worry about, but just in case you are doing a mosaic, you will see this pop up with multiple visits, usually within one observation. Special requirements should be used very sparingly. They impact scheduling and they can reduce flexibility, so you should only add them if they're scientifically necessary. You should not worry about adding a special requirement because you think it's going to make the program more efficient. We have a scheduling team that does a great job scheduling the visits very efficiently, so you don't need to worry about efficiency. And these requirements really should be justified in your PDF that you're going to submit to the TAC and explain why you scientifically need these special requirements. Now, there are 2 types of special requirements. I'm going to give a high-level overview of them, but again, if you need to read up on any of them, you can go to this context-sensitive help and take it to you in JDocs, and it will give you a lot of detailed information on all the available special requirements. The special requirements that you can enter are just here under special requirements, but there are also implicit requirements which APT automatically adds. Now, for a case where we have multiple visits within one observation, it adds the visit's same position angle special requirement because we want all of the visits in this mosaic to execute at the same position angle. It also adds a group visits within 53 days. And this keeps all the visits within the same field of regard. We don't want a case where half the mosaic executes this year and half the mosaic executes next year. We try to do it all at the same time. It's not possible to get rid of these implicit requirements, but you can edit some of them. So I could edit this group within and make it shorter. I do not recommend that you do that. You want to give us as much time as possible to schedule your mosaic and keep it at the 53 days. But if you had a legitimate reason for narrowing that down, you could do that and provide a justification in your PDF. Now, what about the special requirements that you can add yourself? It's again just clicking on add, and we have a lot of options such as timing special requirements. An after date allows you to enter a date that you want this observation to take place after. Maybe you're doing some data reduction and you still need a little more time on some previous observations. So before you want this visit or observation to execute, you need to enter, you want to give yourself a little time. So you can enter a date. I'm going to remove that because I don't need it. There's also a before date. If you, again, have a legitimate reason why you need this observation to execute before a certain date, you could enter that. But you also have between dates. And I'm just going to enter these. Like, perhaps this observation is coordinated with another observatory, and I know it needs to go between specific dates. So that's a legitimate reason to add a between. I can add the between two different ways. I can click on this calendar feature and then change the dates. And maybe I want to do May 1st, 2025. Or I can also just type it in, which might be easier in some cases. So I'm going to go out to June 30th of 2025. And now I've entered a between. There are a few other timing constraints. There's a phase constraint, which I'll get back to in a moment. There's an after observation link, which allows you to schedule observations, say 1 after 2. Maybe there's a reason for that. And I can do it by days, hours, minutes, seconds if I needed to. I don't really need this requirement, so I'm going to remove it. And there's also group sequence observation links. And this allows you to do the observations within a certain number of days. Maybe I need them within 20 days. Another way you could do it is maybe you need them to go back to back, and that would be a non-interruptible. Now it says group observations 1, 2, non-interruptible. That means that observations 1 and 2 could execute on either order. 1 could be first, or 2 could be first as far as being observed. If you really need them in sequential order, check sequence. And that will force observation 1 before 2 and 2 before 3 and so on. So I don't need this special requirement, so I'm going to remove it. Now, I mentioned phase, and I'm going to go over to my exoplanet here in the tree editor and add a phase. Now, most exoplanets need phase range, a period, a zero phase, and you can again click on all of these to read in depth in JDocs about these. I wrote down what was needed for this exoplanet, so I'm going to enter those values. Okay, my phase range, my period, and my zero. And now I've entered, whoop, did I enter an error? Probably. There I go. So now I have a phase and a period and a zero phase on my exoplanet. So there are a few more special requirements that you might be interested in. Position angle. If I click on position angle range and edit, this gives me a range that I want to enter for the position angle. Now you have a choice of an aperture position angle or a V3PA. If you're going to get your range values from Aladdin or the Visit Planner, those are in V3PA. So it's very important that you check the V3PA button here. I happen to know that I need a 180 to 300, so I will enter that in my V3PA range. Okay, with position angle, you can have the same position angle link between multiple observations, and again, they can be done in V3 or the aperture position angle if you want them. I don't actually need that, so I'll remove it. And I can also do a position angle offset, which offsets the orient from one visit to the other, and you can enter the offset degrees as well as your reference axis. Again, that's not something I need for this case, so I'm going to remove it. Okay, so we have a few other special requirements, such as offset. Now, offset is a special requirement that's a constraint to specify the placement of a target at a position away from the default fiducial point of the given instrument or aperture. And it's just a offset by X and Y in arc seconds. Time series is a special requirement that specifies that a special time series pipeline will be used to process the data. And it's only allowed for certain types of templates, such as we have time series templates. And APT will give an error if you illegally use it. So in this case, if I selected this, you see now I get that red X because this is not a legal case for this special requirement. So I have to remove it. On hold means that you can simply allow this observation to be on hold because it needs to be updated and should not be executed. Typically, it's used for target opportunity programs, but there are other cases where maybe you really do need to put something on hold because you're doing data analysis or something on previously executed targets and visits. So you can enter that comment. Again, it's just a text field. Target of opportunity, this is a required special requirement. If you are doing a target of opportunity, you have to put in a response time. Maybe I need this to be done within 15 days of activation. The number of activations, I'm only going to activate once. And there's a checkbox for carry over TRO. And that just means that if this observation isn't done in cycle 3, it will be carried over to cycle 4. And this is usually done for targets that do not have a good probability of occurrence during one cycle. Some targets are like that and others are not. So it depends on what your target is if you'll need to check that box. This isn't a target opportunity, so I'm going to remove it. Maximum visit duration. This is a very rarely used special requirement. It means that when APT splits an observation into multiple visits, the maximum duration of each visit should be less than the specified duration. And it basically allows a longer visit to be turned into shorter visits to provide more flexibility when scheduling. Again, it's rarely used. If you would think you would need it, I definitely recommend you look at the description of it in JDocs. Background limited is used for faint targets. It's important for signal to noise, and it specifies that the observation should be scheduled such that the total background noise is no more than either the default value of 10 percentile above the minimum background expected. But you can also change this to 20, 30, 40, or 50. This special requirement does impact scheduling. And so you will need to weigh that your desire to have this against the scheduling opportunities that you'll see in the visit planner. If it makes your visit unschedulable, you will not be able to use it because you do need to have schedulable visits. So you may have to do a little bit of back and forth between the visit planner and determining what is the tolerance that you want on this type of observation. If you don't need it, don't use it. Now, I just wanted to point out that you're seeing fiducial point override, which most likely isn't in your APT. And that's because I'm at the Institute. And even though I've tried to mimic that I'm not at the Institute, it's still picking this one up. It's an engineering special requirement, so it's not something that a general observer would normally use. And so that's my high-level overview of special requirements.